Have you ever built a tech empire? Only for a narcissistic CEO to fire you via text at 4 in the morning because you were too difficult. I lived it. But instead of crying, I turned that termination into a death sentence for his career. Grab a strong coffee. You are about to hear a crash course on how to legally steal $150 million right under the enemy's nose. Hello, listeners of Boss Revenge Stories. We are so grateful for your continued support. But unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us with absolutely no operating budget. If you find yourself enjoying today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our hardworking staff, help them cover their daily living expenses, and continue creating these revenge dramas for you. You can easily donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen right now, or by clicking the PayPal link located in the description or the pinned comment below. Thank you so much for keeping this channel alive. I am Harper Phillips, and this is exactly how I dismantled an empire. The notification pinged at exactly 4:12 in the morning. The harsh glow of my phone screen cut through the pitch-black darkness of my bedroom, dragging me out of a deep sleep. It was a direct message on our internal Slack platform from Julian, the flashy, perpetually tanned CEO of Novalume Innovations, the Austin, Texas-based green energy startup where I served as the director of data architecture. The message was as cowardly and hollow as the man himself. Harper, effective immediately, we are letting you go. You have proven far too rigid and incredibly difficult to manage during this critical growth phase. That was his sanitized corporate translation for my absolute refusal to manipulate our efficiency metrics to make his pitch deck look prettier. He wanted me to fabricate the numbers to secure his venture capital. I looked him in the eye and told him no. So, he chose to fire me in the middle of the night via a text application. A normal person might have panicked. They might have cried, called their family in tears, or started furiously typing out a desperate defense to human resources. I did absolutely none of those things. I simply sat up, pushed the heavy blankets aside, and opened my laptop. Julian was a master of grand gestures and inspirational stage speeches, but he possessed absolutely zero understanding of basic operational logistics. Novalume was a typical startup running entirely on caffeine, ego, and disorganized chaos, which meant our IT department was completely manual. They did not have automated offboarding scripts tied to termination triggers. I knew for an absolute fact that the tired, underpaid IT manager would not even be awake to log in and revoke my system access until at least 6 o'clock in the morning. That simple administrative flaw gave me a death window of nearly 2 hours. I had roughly 108 minutes of total, unrestricted, God-level access to the entire company infrastructure. The first and most important rule of corporate revenge is simple: never break the law. Angry employees who delete databases or deploy malicious ransomware end up going to federal prison. I had no intention of wearing an orange jumpsuit for Julian. I was not going to destroy a single line of code or wipe a single server. I was going to use the undisputed truth. I logged into our secure network and navigated straight to the virtual data room. This was the highly restricted digital vault set up specifically for our upcoming Series C funding round. It was the holy grail of the company, where potential investors would comb through our financials and technical documentation before handing over $150 million in capital. Julian had carefully curated this space with heavily sanitized, completely fictionalized projections, moving with absolute cold precision. I took the authentic, unaltered beta testing reports. These were the files showing our solar arrays bleeding massive amounts of power at high temperatures, the exact dismal numbers Julian had ordered me to bury forever. I slipped them into a deeply nested subfolder within the legal due diligence section. I renamed the file to look like standard regulatory compliance boilerplate. It was perfectly camouflaged, waiting like a silent, ticking time bomb for anyone thorough enough to actually conduct proper auditing. Next, I moved on to the core algorithm. Novalume's entire multi-million-dollar valuation rested on a predictive load balancing model. Julian paraded it around at conferences as the company's proprietary crown jewel. What Julian conveniently forgot, or perhaps was simply too arrogant to care about, was that the core sub-algorithm powering the entire system was my own personal creation. I had written it, filed the paperwork, and legally copyrighted it a full 8 months before I even signed my employment contract with Novalume. It belonged entirely to me. I calmly initiated a secure transfer, downloading the entire legal intellectual property package directly onto my encrypted personal drive. I then removed the original integration keys from the company repository, effectively severing their ability to update or modify the core code without my proprietary framework. By the time the clock struck 5:45, my digital footprint was immaculate. I closed my laptop, got dressed in my usual dark suit, and drove the empty Austin streets to the downtown office. The glass and steel building was completely deserted. I walked into my corner office for the very last time. I did not take a single piece of company property. I packed up my personal ergonomic keyboard, my favorite ceramic coffee mug, and a small framed photo. The whole process took less than 10 minutes. Before walking out the glass door, I placed my heavy magnetic employee access badge right in the center of my spotless mahogany desk. Right next to it, I placed a bright yellow sticky note, grabbed my favorite pen, and wrote a single, final sentence. Good luck with the funding round. Exactly at 8 o'clock in the morning, my phone buzzed against the cool marble surface of a small artisan cafe table. I was sitting exactly 3 blocks away from the towering, sunlit glass facade of the Novalume headquarters. I glanced down at the screen. It was the automated, thoroughly sanitized email from the Human Resources Department, officially confirming my immediate termination and the permanent revocation of my access credentials. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my perfectly pulled black espresso. The morning sun was warming the side of my face. I was officially unemployed, cut off from the empire I had helped build. Yet I had never felt more firmly in control of my own destiny. I did not immediately open professional networking sites. I did not begin drafting a polished resume. I had absolutely no intention of looking for another arrogant master to serve. Instead, I reached into the deep, silk-lined pocket of my tailored wool coat and pulled out an inexpensive prepaid burner phone. I had purchased it in cash several weeks ago, anticipating that Julian's fragile ego would eventually fracture. I dialed a private, highly guarded offshore number. It was the direct emergency line belonging to Eleanor Vance. Eleanor was the ruthless, incredibly sharp billionaire venture capitalist whose investment firm served as the absolute lifeblood of our company. If Julian was the loud, flashy, purely decorative engine of Novalume, Eleanor was the premium, high-octane fuel keeping the entire operation from stalling out and crashing. The line rang exactly twice before a sharp, gravelly, no-nonsense voice answered. "Speak." I kept my voice perfectly level, stripping away any trace of emotion, bitterness, or hesitation. "Eleanor, it is Harper Phillips. I am no longer with Novalume as of 4 o'clock this morning. I am calling you strictly as a professional courtesy." I did not complain. I did not whine about the unfairness of my termination, nor did I launch into a desperate, rambling character assassination of my former boss. That was the predictable, sloppy behavior of the weak and the defeated. I knew better. I simply planted a tiny, highly infectious seed of doubt. "Before you authorize the final release of the Series C funds," I said, my tone as casual as if I were discussing the weather, "I highly recommend you have your own, completely independent technical auditors look at Hidden File Directory 404. You will find it buried deep within the legal due diligence section of the virtual data room. Have a wonderful morning. Eleanor." I ended the call immediately. I pressed the red button and removed the battery from the burner phone. I did not give her a single second to ask follow-up questions or demand an explanation. Eleanor Vance was not a woman who accumulated her vast wealth by trusting the glossy smiles and firm handshakes of charismatic tech founders. She was a hardened, battle-scarred veteran of Silicon Valley financial warfare, deeply cynical and exceptionally paranoid by nature. I knew exactly how her razor-sharp mind operated. By hanging up abruptly, I forced her anxious brain to fill in the terrifying blanks. That brief, cryptic suggestion was infinitely more alarming to a seasoned investor than a screaming, disgruntled ex-employee waving a lawsuit. Within seconds of our disconnected call, I knew with absolute certainty that she was already aggressively dialing her chief financial officer. She would secretly freeze the impending massive wire transfer. The money was now halted in midair, hanging by an invisible, fraying thread that Julian could not even see. While I was quietly and methodically dismantling his financial future, Julian was busy vigorously stroking his own ego, thanks to a sympathetic junior engineer who casually and deliberately left his microphone open in the main conference room. I listened in on the emergency all-hands meeting Julian had hastily convened at exactly 9:30. His voice boomed through my discreet wireless earbud, dripping with false bravado and toxic, manufactured positivity. "Team, I want to address the elephant in the room right away," Julian announced to the tense, confused staff. "Harper has moved on to other endeavors, sometimes, to achieve truly exponential growth. We simply have to let go of the heavy anchors holding us back from greatness. This is not a loss. My friends, this is a necessary purge to break through to our next level of innovation. We are streamlining our vision, we are evolving rapidly, and we are absolutely unstoppable." I smiled darkly into my empty ceramic coffee cup. He was completely, utterly oblivious. He genuinely believed he had heroically amputated a difficult, stubborn limb, entirely unaware that he had just politely handed the master key directly to the architect of his own ruin. He was aggressively selling his employees a beautiful vision of a rocket ship journey, while standing completely blindfolded on a launch platform built upon a massive, rapidly collapsing foundation. I left the cafe, leaving a generous cash tip, and walked back to my minimalist apartment. I had absolutely no time to waste on celebrating a temporary psychological victory. The real, foundational work of my revenge was just beginning. Over the next several grueling hours, I sat hunched at my home workstation. Surrounded by the cool blue light of 3 glowing monitors, I expertly navigated complex legal portals, corporate tax codes, and obscure offshore business registries. Before the sun even thought about setting over the Texas horizon, within exactly 24 hours of losing my executive title and my salary, I had formally submitted the exhaustive legal paperwork. I paid the exorbitant expedited filing fees with my own savings, and legally incorporated a brand new, airtight shell company. I named it Helios Dynamics, to the unobservant outside world. It was just another faceless, freshly minted corporate entity existing purely on digital paper, but in the grand, intricate scheme of the chessboard I was rapidly assembling. Helios Dynamics was the sleek, heavily armored financial vessel designed specifically to catch the staggering $150 million windfall I was about to violently shake loose from Julian's fragile, crumbling empire. By the third day, the manufactured peace at my former workplace shattered entirely. 72 hours was exactly how long it took for their heavily compensated, vastly underqualified legal team to finally review the server access logs. Right on schedule. My personal inbox chimed with an urgent, high-priority email. It was a massive, desperately worded cease and desist notice, signed by Julian's chief legal counsel. The document was an absolute masterpiece of corporate panic, spanning 14 pages of dense, aggressive legalese. They formally accused me of corporate espionage, unauthorized data manipulation, and the outright theft of proprietary trade secrets. They demanded the immediate return of all digital assets within 24 hours and threatened me with catastrophic financial ruin, civil lawsuits, and federal prosecution. I did not hire an attorney. I did not draft a defensive, multi-paragraph rebuttal to explain my innocence. The most effective weapon against a spiraling corporate lawyer is the terrifying void of absolute silence, punctuated by a single, undeniable legal fact. I hit the reply button. I deleted their entire threatening diatribe from the body of the message. I typed exactly one sentence. Please refer to the Texas Labor Code, Chapter 21, regarding the absolute legal protections afforded under the Whistleblower Act. I hit send. I could practically smell the cold sweat breaking out on the chief counsel's forehead the moment that email landed on his screen. By explicitly citing state whistleblower protections, I was legally signaling that I had not stolen anything at all. I had secured irrefutable evidence of a massive financial crime. If they dared to sue me or drag me into a courtroom, that evidence would instantly become a matter of public record during the discovery phase. It was a brilliant, unbreakable Mexican standoff. The legal department was completely paralyzed. While the lawyers were having a collective meltdown, Julian was experiencing his own personal nightmare on the executive floor. The tiny seed of doubt I had planted with Eleanor Vance was rapidly sprouting into a massive, suffocating vine. The venture capital world is an incredibly tight, deeply paranoid echo chamber. When a whale like Eleanor silently pauses her movements, the smaller fish instantly freeze. Julian's daily calendar, usually packed solid with eager investors, was suddenly disintegrating before his eyes. Minor syndicate investors, the ones who were supposed to pad the funding round, were abruptly canceling their meetings. They offered weak, highly choreographed excuses about sudden scheduling conflicts, shifting market conditions, and reevaluating their third-quarter portfolios. Julian was dialing numbers frantically all afternoon, only to be repeatedly dumped into the sterile, automated void of executive voicemail systems. The money was evaporating, and the silence from the financial sector was deafening. Unable to control the narrative or manipulate his audience, Julian's carefully crafted facade of the visionary tech leader completely dissolved. He regressed into the raw, unhinged paranoia of a cornered animal. By late afternoon, my burner phone began vibrating violently across my kitchen island. It was Julian, bypassing all official corporate channels and resorting to frantic, emotionally volatile text messages. He completely abandoned his polished corporate vocabulary. "You are completely dead in this industry," read the first text at exactly 4:15. 10 minutes later, another arrived, riddled with frantic typos. "I will personally make sure you never work in technology in the United States ever again. I will destroy your reputation. You are a thief. You are absolutely nothing without me." I sat on my modern bar stool, casually sipping a glass of chilled, sparkling water, watching his digital temper tantrum unfold in real time. Every single message he sent was a magnificent gift. I did not respond to a single one. Instead, I calmly took high-resolution screenshots of every threat, meticulously archiving them into a secure, encrypted digital vault. He was no longer just a terrible boss firing an employee. He was actively creating a highly documented trail of witness intimidation and corporate extortion. But I was not content to simply sit back and play defense. It was time to apply external pressure to the fragile glass walls of his company, using a secure network routed through 3 different countries to mask my location. I drafted an anonymous, highly encrypted message. I attached a very small, carefully redacted slice of the real performance metrics. I sent it directly to a notoriously aggressive technology journalist, a man famous for absolutely destroying fraudulent Silicon Valley startups. I did not give him the entire story. I just gave him enough raw, unexplainable data showing a 40% drop in solar efficiency at 90 degrees Fahrenheit. It was just enough blood in the water to make his journalistic instincts flare up. I knew for a fact he would start making incredibly uncomfortable phone calls to Novalume's public relations department by the end of the week. Then came the move I had been quietly anticipating, the brilliant twist that would pivot the entire war. As evening fell, a sleek, unmarked black envelope was hand-delivered to my apartment building by a private courier. There was no return address. Inside, printed on heavy, cream-colored cardstock, was a single, elegant invitation. It was from Eleanor Vance. She had not reported my mysterious phone call to Julian. She had not forwarded my number to the authorities. Instead, the ruthless billionaire was secretly inviting me to a highly discreet, private dinner at one of the most exclusive, members-only dining clubs in the city. The handwritten note simply read, 8 o'clock tonight. Bring the key to the locked door. Let us discuss the future. Eleanor did not want to protect Julian's crumbling empire. She was a predator who had just realized her primary asset was defective. She wanted to know exactly how deep the rot went, and she knew with absolute certainty that I was the only architect holding the flashlight. The week leading up to the massive Series C funding gala was supposed to be Julian's glorious, undisputed coronation as the next major visionary of the green energy sector. Instead, the sterile glass walls of the corporate headquarters rapidly transformed into a high-tech pressure cooker of absolute, unmitigated panic. My sudden, unceremonious departure had instantly triggered a catastrophic cascading failure across their entire infrastructure. Without my proprietary sub-algorithm actively bridging the massive data streams, the main predictive load balancing model began throwing severe, uncorrectable latency errors. By Tuesday morning, the entire user interface dashboard, usually a sleek visualization of operational efficiency, was bleeding neon red. The automated systems in the beta solar arrays were actively failing in the field, reporting completely nonsensical data back to headquarters. The servers were desperately trying to process the complex environmental variables, but were constantly hitting a solid digital brick wall exactly where my integration keys used to be. Julian was completely losing his tenuous grip on reality. I had reliable sources telling me he paced the executive floor like a trapped, rabid animal, screaming profusely at the remaining technical staff. A terrified senior engineer finally mustered the courage to deliver the fatal, unavoidable blow to Julian's fragile ego. He stood in the center of the glass-walled office, visibly trembling under the furious gaze of his boss. "We have tried reverse engineering the entire architecture from the ground up," the engineer stammered, bracing for impact. "But the core logic is entirely locked behind a proprietary firewall we absolutely cannot bypass. The system cannot be patched without Harper's decryption key." Julian realized in that exact horrifying moment that he was holding the steering wheel of a luxury sports car with absolutely no engine, heading straight for a terrifying cliff at 100 miles per hour. By Thursday afternoon, exactly 48 hours before the grand investment gala was scheduled to begin, Julian was finally forced to swallow his massive, suffocating pride. However, he was still far too cowardly to face me directly, especially after the unhinged digital temper tantrum he had thrown via text earlier in the week. Instead, my phone rang, displaying the familiar main switchboard number of the front office. I answered on the second ring, only to hear the nervous, wavering voice of Chloe, his executive assistant. "Hi, Harper," she whispered into the receiver, sounding exactly as if she were being held hostage in a bunker. "Julian wanted me to reach out immediately. He is desperate and willing to offer you a temporary external consulting contract. He will pay you exactly 3 times your previous annual salary in cash. He just needs you to come in for 48 hours to stabilize the core model before the investors arrive. He explicitly said you can literally name your absolute highest price." I reclined slowly in my ergonomic chair, staring out at the bright Texas sky. The pure, unadulterated desperation radiating from that single offer was intensely intoxicating. He was bleeding out on the corporate floor, pathetically begging the person he had stabbed to hand him a single bandage. "Chloe," I replied, my voice dripping with excessive, highly manufactured politeness, "please tell Julian I am incredibly flattered by his exceedingly generous offer. However, I must politely decline. I am afraid I have already signed an ironclad, exclusive agreement with a brand new partner, and my current strict contractual obligations completely prohibit me from engaging with competing entities in any capacity. Have a lovely afternoon." I disconnected the call immediately, taking a deep, satisfying breath as I visualized the exact, explosive moment Chloe relayed that specific message back to Julian. The devastating damage was no longer neatly contained within the engineering department. Wall Street and Silicon Valley operate almost entirely on whispered rumors, invisible momentum, and herd mentality. On the highly unregulated secondary markets, where early employees and angel investors secretly trade their private company shares, raw panic was aggressively setting in. The anonymous, encrypted tip I had provided to the technology journalist had started a quiet but incredibly deadly fire. Key venture capitalists were talking behind closed doors, whispers of technical insolvency, fake numbers, and a highly unstable chief executive spread through the elite financial clubs like a vicious virus. Junior developers and marketing managers, people who had banked their entire financial futures on this upcoming liquidity event, were frantically trying to offload their vested equity options at a massive discount, only to find absolutely zero willing buyers. The internal stock price violently plummeted, losing nearly 40% of its perceived value in just 3 excruciating days. The absolute poetic irony of Julian's impending destruction was that he was frantically scouring the industry, searching for my mysterious new employer, completely unaware that the lethal threat was already inside his own house. You, the audience, deserve to know the beautiful truth right now. The exclusive partner I had politely mentioned to Chloe on the phone was not a rival tech startup. It was not a massive corporate competitor trying to steal his market share. My new strategic partner was none other than the core investment syndicate, led entirely by the ruthless billionaire, Eleanor Vance, during our highly classified, dimly lit private dinner earlier that week. I did not just show her the authentic, catastrophic testing data. I presented her with the legal incorporation documents for my newly minted shell company, Helios Dynamics. I offered her the pristine, fully functional algorithmic framework, entirely free of Julian's toxic mismanagement and fraudulent accounting. Eleanor Vance, the undisputed, cold-blooded queen of venture capital, had quietly and decisively shifted her entire financial loyalty to me. Julian was not just losing his company. He was currently spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to throw a lavish, self-congratulatory party for investors who had already secretly handed me the master keys to his entire kingdom. The evening of the Series C gala finally arrived. Cloaking the city in a velvet darkness, Julian had spared absolutely no expense, utilizing the last remaining fumes of the company credit line to rent out the grand ballroom of the most opulent, historically significant luxury hotel in downtown Austin. Walking through the massive, gilded double doors was like stepping into a monument dedicated entirely to a madman's ego. Crystal chandeliers the size of small vehicles hung from the intricately painted ceiling, casting a warm, expensive glow over the room. Massive floral arrangements of imported white orchids decorated every available surface. Waiters in immaculate white tuxedo jackets glided silently across the polished marble floors, carrying heavy silver trays loaded with crystal flutes of imported vintage champagne. A live string quartet played softly in the corner, providing a sophisticated soundtrack to what was supposed to be the absolute crowning achievement of Julian's career. He was standing near the front of the room, nervously adjusting the lapels of his custom-tailored midnight blue tuxedo, mentally rehearsing the grandiose, deeply delusional speech he was about to deliver regarding the limitless, world-changing future of our clean energy platform. For the entirety of my professional tenure, my colleagues only knew me in highly structured, dark wool suits and sensible, low-heeled leather pumps. I was the invisible technical architect, the quiet woman who lived in the server room and spoke strictly in data points and risk assessments. Tonight, I completely shattered that carefully constructed corporate illusion. I stepped out of my hired black town car and approached the red carpet entrance wearing a floor-length, meticulously draped emerald green silk evening gown that hugged every curve before cascading elegantly to the marble floor. The rich color perfectly matched the aggressive, high-stakes energy of the night. I paired it with towering stiletto heels that clicked sharply against the floor, and a diamond choker that caught the ambient light with every single step I took. I did not look like a disgruntled, recently terminated middle manager. I looked like a woman who legally owned the entire building. I walked straight past the thick velvet ropes, completely bypassing the frantic public relations coordinators holding their glowing digital guest lists, and entered the grand ballroom with the undeniable, terrifying authority of a top-tier VIP. It did not take long for my unexpected presence to trigger the silent security alarms. the head of corporate security, a massive man with a discreet earpiece, spotted me instantly. His face hardened as he clearly recognized my face from the digital termination bulletin circulated earlier that week. He immediately signaled two other guards, and they began moving rapidly through the dense crowd of wealthy investors, their heavy footsteps completely muffled by the thick, luxurious carpet. They were fully prepared to quietly and forcibly escort me out through the back service doors to avoid a public scandal. I stood my ground, my posture perfectly straight, holding a slim metallic evening clutch purse. Just as the massive head of security reached out his heavy hand to grab my bare shoulder, a sharp, incredibly commanding voice sliced right through the ambient, polite chatter of the ballroom. "Do not even think about touching her." The guards froze instantly, pulling their hands back as if they had touched a live electrical wire. Eleanor Vance emerged from the dense crowd of incredibly wealthy financiers like a silver-haired shark gliding through a school of terrified minnows. She was wearing a sharply tailored, stark white tuxedo suit that screamed absolute financial dominance. She stepped smoothly between me and the confused security team, gracefully looping her arm tightly through mine. She leveled a stare of pure, freezing ice at the imposing security guard. "She is with me," Eleanor stated loudly, her voice echoing slightly in the sudden, incredibly tense quiet of our immediate circle. "And if you attempt to remove my personal guest from this venue, I will personally ensure this entire hotel is completely shut down before midnight." The security team physically backed away, nodding frantic apologies, completely terrified of offending the billionaire who held the entire financial fate of the evening in her perfectly manicured hands. I turned my gaze toward the raised stage at the front of the luxurious room. Julian had watched the entire brief, silent altercation unfold from his elevated position. From exactly 50 feet away, I could literally see the exact second his heart stopped beating inside his chest. He was desperately attempting to maintain his trademark, dazzling, highly charismatic smile for the surrounding board members, but the absolute, raw terror radiating from his widened eyes was entirely impossible to hide. A thick layer of cold sweat suddenly and visibly broke out across his perfectly bronzed forehead. His hands, gripping a delicate glass of sparkling water, began to tremble violently. He knew I was not there to make a desperate, emotional scene. He knew with absolute certainty that I was there to execute him. What Julian did not know was that the real weapon of his destruction was not my dramatic physical entrance. The true weapon was currently sitting quietly inside my metallic clutch, exactly 2 hours prior, while getting my hair professionally styled. I had accessed a remote, heavily encrypted offshore cloud server. I had carefully written and scheduled a highly sophisticated automated script. It was firmly linked to a comprehensive database containing the personal cell phone numbers and private business email addresses of every single major shareholder, board member, and venture capitalist currently standing in that glittering ballroom. The script was meticulously loaded with the unredacted beta testing reports, the catastrophic hardware failure logs, and the undeniable proof of Julian's deliberate financial fraud. The digital countdown timer on my phone was currently sitting at exactly 2 minutes. A sharp, elegant chime echoed through the sophisticated sound system, signaling the esteemed guests to take their respective seats at the heavily decorated tables. The ambient lights in the massive ballroom slowly began to dim, plunging the wealthy audience into a hushed, expectant darkness. A single, brilliant white spotlight snapped on, perfectly illuminating the center of the main stage. Behind the wooden podium, an enormous, state-of-the-art LED screen flickered to life, projecting the vibrant, completely fabricated, aggressively upward-trending growth chart that Julian had spent the last 3 months frantically forcing his marketing team to draw by hand. The room fell completely silent. The heavy, suffocating weight of anticipation hung thick in the air. Julian took a deep, incredibly shaky breath and stepped up to the microphone, completely unaware that the invisible bomb quietly ticking inside my purse was seconds away from detonating. Julian cleared his throat, leaning into the sleek microphone on the podium. He flashed that signature, blinding smile, though the corners of his mouth twitched with barely contained panic. "Distinguished guests, visionary partners, and friends," he began, his voice projecting smoothly over the top of the high-end sound system. "Tonight, we do not just celebrate a milestone. We celebrate the absolute dawn of a new era in sustainable infrastructure. Novolume is no longer just a company. We are an unstoppable global movement." He paused, dramatically raising his hand holding the small plastic presentation remote. "Allow me to show you the exact trajectory of our shared, limitless future." He pressed the small forward button with a definitive click. Behind him, the massive state-of-the-art LED screen went completely black for a fraction of a second. Then, instead of the vibrant, beautifully colored, upward-trending revenue graphs his marketing team had meticulously fabricated, the screen violently flashed a blinding, aggressive crimson red. Thousands of lines of raw, unformatted, brutally honest system code began aggressively scrolling down the enormous display. It was the exact, catastrophic hardware failure logs I had expertly hidden inside Hidden File Directory 404, massive, undeniable red text pulsed at the center of the screen. Reading, "Critical system failure efficiency drop 40%, hardware overheating." It was the undisputed, horrific truth of his failing hardware, projected in 10-foot-high glowing letters for every single billionaire in the room to witness. A collective, confused murmur instantly rippled through the sea of elegantly dressed investors. People shifted uncomfortably in their plush seats, exchanging bewildered glances. Then, perfectly synchronized with the disaster unfolding on the screen, the automated script I had launched from my phone executed its final command. Across the cavernous ballroom, an absolute symphony of notification chimes erupted. Dozens of high-end smartphones, hidden inside expensive tuxedo pockets and designer evening bags, vibrated and rang simultaneously. The sharp pings cut through the murmurs like shattered glass. Board members and venture capitalists alike instinctively reached for their devices. As they opened the anonymous emails, the confusion on their faces rapidly morphed into sheer, unadulterated horror and then deep, furious outrage. They were staring directly at the comprehensive financial crime whistleblower dossier. They were reading the exact emails where Julian explicitly demanded the falsification of efficiency metrics. They were looking at the true, bleeding balance sheets. Julian stood completely frozen behind the wooden podium, his bronzed face draining of all color until he looked like a wax statue rapidly melting under the intense stage lights. He spun around, staring at the damning red code behind him, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocated fish. "Ladies and gentlemen," he stammered into the microphone, his voice cracking violently, stripped of all its former confidence. "Please, do not be alarmed. This is clearly just a minor technical glitch, a simple software malfunction. If you will just give my team 5 minutes to reset the projection system, we can continue." "There is absolutely no glitch, Julian," a voice rang out. The microphone was not needed. Eleanor Vance's voice possessed the sharp, metallic authority of a guillotine dropping. She stood up slowly from her prime seat at the center table, the stark white of her tuxedo suit commanding the immediate, absolute attention of every single person in the room. The murmurs instantly died down. The string quartet in the corner stopped playing mid-note. The silence that fell over the grand ballroom was heavy, suffocating, and incredibly lethal. Eleanor took 2 deliberate steps toward the stage, her piercing gaze pinning Julian in place. What we are looking at on that screen, and what every single person in this room just received on their personal devices, is the absolute truth you have been desperately trying to bury. You have intentionally falsified data, misrepresented your hardware capabilities, and attempted to defraud this entire investment syndicate. Julian gripped the edges of the podium so hard his knuckles turned completely white. "Eleanor, please, you have to listen to me. That data is completely manipulated. It is a targeted attack by a disgruntled former employee." "Do not insult my intelligence," Eleanor snapped, her voice echoing off the gilded ceiling. I had my own independent forensic auditors verify every single line of that data 3 days ago. Your proprietary system is completely dead, your hardware is failing, and as of this exact moment, your company is entirely worthless. She turned gracefully to face the stunned crowd of silent investors. As the lead investor of the Series C syndicate, I am officially withdrawing our entire commitment. We are pulling all $150 million from Novolume Innovations immediately. A loud gasp echoed through the room, but Eleanor raised a single, commanding hand, demanding total silence. However, she continued, a faint, predatory smile touching the corners of her lips. The green energy sector remains incredibly lucrative. The fundamental algorithm that actually makes this technology viable was never owned by Julian or his crumbling company. It is completely proprietary, legally patented, and absolutely brilliant. Therefore, my syndicate will be immediately reallocating our entire $150 million capital injection into a brand new entity. Eleanor turned her head, extending her hand directly toward me where I stood perfectly still near the entrance. We are officially backing Helios Dynamics, under the absolute technical and executive leadership of its new Chief Executive Officer, Harper Phillips. The entire room turned to look at me. I did not gloat. I did not smirk. I simply stood tall in my emerald gown, meeting the gaze of the most powerful people in the industry with absolute, unwavering calm. I had not just taken his funding. I had taken his entire future, his network, and his absolute credibility. On the stage, the physical toll of absolute defeat finally crashed down on Julian. His legs seemingly gave out beneath him. He stumbled backward, his shoulder hitting the large LED screen as he slumped toward the floor, completely destroyed by his own arrogance. In his desperate, cowardly attempt to purge an employee he deemed too difficult to manage, he had forcefully birthed the exact monster that just swallowed his entire existence whole. Waiters, sensing the immediate shift in power, smoothly began moving through the crowd again, offering fresh beverages. An older, distinguished board member walked directly over to me, extending a crystal flute of vintage champagne. I took it gracefully. Eleanor walked over, taking a glass for herself, and lightly tapped the rim against mine. The gentle clink of the expensive crystal rang like a beautiful victory bell. I took a slow, deeply satisfying sip of the cold champagne. I looked past the rim of my glass, watching Julian being quietly escorted off his own stage by the hotel's security guards. It was the perfect, undeniable proof that while titles can be stripped and access can be revoked, true competence, legal ownership, and absolute truth can never, ever be fired. Thank you so much, dear listeners, for joining me and listening to this incredible story of corporate justice. We would love to know where you are tuning in from today, so please let us know in the comments below if you found today's story engaging and satisfying. We humbly ask for your support. Please consider donating just $1 to help keep our channel alive. You can easily do this by scanning the PayPal QR code currently on your screen, or by using the PayPal link provided in the video description and pinned comment. Your generous $1 contribution goes directly to paying our dedicated staff, helping them feed their families, and allowing us to continue producing the high-quality revenge stories you love. Thank you again, and we will see you in the next episode.